Did you closely watch the video of Apollo 11 orbiting the moon and notice something else rather strange? The first question you may have is what or who is taking the video? Well, there can only be one answer to that question. The lunar module is the only other spacecraft in the vicinity, but why is it so much higher than the command module? It has detached from the command module for its descent towards the moon, so why did it rise up higher than the command module? We know that the command module did not descend, as according to NASA it was in a fixed orbit around the moon. Even stranger still is the way in the video that the lunar module, which we must assume is taking the video, manages to stay precisely above the command module as they both orbit the moon. The lunar module is in a higher orbit, so it cannot be traveling at the same speed as the command module for such a long time as shown in the video. Once again, we have conclusive proof that this video is a total fake and was not taken on the moon. Whoever devised this fake video sequence certainly did not understand the basic orbital mechanics. Some moon landing skeptics even suggest that these inconsistencies were deliberately added by whistleblowers. The lunar module. The Apollo lunar module, more properly called the Lunar Excursion Module or LEM, but also mostly referred to simply as the Lunar Module LM, was NASA's design for the spacecraft to land on the moon. It needed to make the powered descent to the moon to protect the astronauts while they were on the moon, and finally to bring the astronauts back to the Command and Service Module CSM, which had been patiently orbiting the moon. It was the most complicated and sophisticated spacecraft ever built for the Apollo missions. It was an entirely independent spacecraft with its own rocket motors, fuel, battery life support system, and navigation equipment. Now there are a few elements to this spacecraft that warrant our attention. It was the most improbable looking spacecraft that you could imagine. You only had to look at it and wonder about the design specification. It is perhaps the most crucial element of the entire Apollo mission, as it performed some of the most difficult operations. It was built by Grumman Aircraft, who encountered great difficulties in its design, so much so that it missed its planned first flight on Apollo 4 and instead first flew on the unmanned Apollo 5 flight. The design of the LM has attracted much criticism and even hilarity, as can be witnessed by these two YouTube hilarious videos by Antonio Subarets.
And of course, you have to shield the legs, because if you don't shield the legs, then something really bad will happen. Maybe the moon have extra corrosive qualities, and this has to be shielded like this, okay? Hey, you know that thing that you showed me the other day? Yes, let's put this on here. Yeah, it would be very funny, and people will think it's a sensor.
We also have a similar critical video from Tenoranda on our lunar module. He concludes that the haphazard nature of its construction looks more like a bad high school project. It has also been described as a homeless shelter after a hurricane. It is feasible that NASA, who could not construct a lunar module that could successfully work on Earth, would send astronauts in a totally untested spacecraft for them to try out on the moon? No, it is not. Amazingly, the USA flag decal appears to have been attached with some sort of sticky tape. At first, you must assume that this was attached by the astronauts when they were on the moon, but no, it actually flew like this all the way from Earth, as can be seen in this enlarged view of the Apollo 16 lunar module after separation from the CSM, already with the US flag decal attached with sticky tape. It is beyond comprehension that the USA flag decal would be simply attached by sticky tape and flown all the way to the moon without coming loose or falling off. The gold quality street type paper is claimed to be needed to insulate the lunar module from the heat generated by the sun. The question is, why only a part of the descent stage is so protected and there is not much protection for the ascent stage? Both the descent stage and the ascent stage both contain volatile fuel and batteries, so one would expect both to have been covered with gold mylar foil, but they are not. Also, if heat reflection was the goal, then why are some of these parts of the ascent stage covered with dark material which does resemble cardboard? Take a look at this sophisticated spacecraft as it comes back from the lunar surface to join the Command and Service Module in orbit. It is hard to know what to think. Would you be happy to travel to your local supermarket in this thing? I can only assume that the people who designed this fakery thought it might be more authentic if it looked used after its journey to the moon. Perhaps they got a little over-enthusiastic in applying the used effect. One final observation of the lunar module was brought to my attention by Mark Lowe of Deep Thoughts Radio. It was something that I had never mentioned before. Take a close look at this photograph of the lunar module after it supposedly landed on the moon. Do you notice anything strange? Notice the rocket skirt, the gray bell-shaped thing hanging down from the lunar module. It looks pristine and new and does not look though it had been fired. Remember, the rocket flame reaches a temperature of 2000 Celsius, surely it would show some signs of burning, but the paintwork looks brand new. This is a close-up of the skirt, which looks to be totally unused to me. The lunar module does not look as though it was in any way capable of landing on the moon, and the rocket of the descent stage does not appear to have been used. However, these facts in themselves do not prove that the moon landings were faked, but that it may give you an ample cause to wonder. Stage lighting. As mentioned above, the stage set would have required a higher degree of lighting than normal, as the videos were filmed in slow motion at 144 frames per second, which requires higher levels of lighting as the camera shutter is not open so long. This extra bright lighting would tend to wash out some of the detail, so it was likely that additional spotlighting of certain areas was required. In many of the Apollo photographs, it is even possible to discern the telltale signature of some of this additional spotlighting. The light from the sun should show roughly equal intensity on basically level ground, but we can detect instances in which this is not apparent. Look at this well-known photograph of Buzz Aldrin. A similar apparition can be seen on NASA photograph AS11-40-5902, which again shows Buzz Aldrin standing by the lunar module on Apollo 11. Again, we see clear evidence of the infill lighting. There are many other strange things about the Apollo photographs which give us cause for concern. After Apollo 11 landed, astronaut Neil Armstrong took several photographs of the moon's surface to the horizon. The Apollo 11 lunar module landed basically on a flat part of the moon in the Sea of Tranquility. The horizontal in such place gives the curvature of the moon, and the height of the camera should be about 2.5 kilometers. Now take a look at one of Neil Armstrong's photographs. The NASA reference number is AS11-40-5857 high-res HR. Does this horizon look 2.5 kilometers away? If we look closely, we can even identify what appears to be small rocks right on the horizon. It would not be possible for the human eye or camera to resolve individual rocks at a range of 2.5 kilometers. Without doubt, this is a small stage set, perhaps only 250 meters to the horizon. One other thing to note about Apollo 11 is that they didn't appear to have used the front screen projection technique or to have the astronauts suspended on wires. Those enhancements were only used after the later missions, presumably after the techniques were developed. Images of the Apollo landing sites. We will now examine the supposed high-resolution photographs of the Apollo landing sites taken by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter LRO. The LRO and the Lunar Sea Radar Observation and Sensing Satellite LCROSS were launched on the Atlas V rocket on 18 June 2009, taking 4 days to reach the moon. The LRO made a three-dimensional map of the moon's surface at 100-meter resolution with 98.2% covering, excluding polar regions in deep shadow, also supposedly including a 0.5-meter resolution images of the Apollo landing sites. It has always been claimed by both sides of the debate that the ultimate proof that the Apollo missions were real would be that the artifacts left on the moon would still be there and could be photographed. NASA claims that they have done this with the LRO photographs of the Apollo landing sites. What I want to concentrate on here are the trails left by the astronauts' footprints and the tracks left by the lunar rover clearly display in the LRO photograph of the Apollo 17 landing site. I will only deal with Apollo 17, but similar observations relate to all 6 landing sites. Now, NASA had filmed this landing site at the ascent stage of the lunar module blasted off from the moon back in 1972. The actual film on the landing site taken by the 35mm DAC camera mounted on the ascent stage starts at about 3 minutes into the video. Do you see any trails? Because I certainly don't. Now, after the doctored photos from the LRO were released in 2009, then the above video was enhanced by some magical process to produce a new version of a reoriented perspective in 2013. In this video, you can clearly see the trails. An even clearer version was incorporated into a new 2011 version, the Shoulders of the Giants video, first released in 1973. You can compare the original video of the blastoff with this new enhanced version. NASA also released a video comparing the original raw video with the contrast enhanced version. In this version, even the raw footage now miraculously has evidence of trails. I think the chronology of what happened can be summarized as follows. 1. NASA was under great pressure to try to prove the moon landings due to the many anomalies identified by the skeptics. 2. This led to the LRO exercise in 2009 and the intention to photograph the Apollo landing sites and the artifacts left by the astronauts, thus proving it was real. 3. The LRO photographs were falsely doctored to show the evidence, then released in 2009. And 4. NASA then needed to rework the original videos to also show the trails in 2011 to 13 and thus complete the evidence. There can be no question that this was more fakery. Why wait until after the LRO to remaster the original videos? This could have been done at any time in the previous 40 years. The LRO evidence, rather than proving Apollo was real, has only identified more fakery by NASA. Flags on the moon. Another interesting observation of the LRO photographs is the evidence of the USA flags erected on the moon by the astronauts. According to NASA, the LRO photographs prove that some of the flags are still standing. NASA claimed that the outstanding high-resolution images from the LRO show the flags from Apollo 12, 16, and 17 are still casting shadows on the lunar surface. When you examine the photographs, then you need a gigantic leap of faith to convince yourself that you are looking at flags casting shadows. We see nothing more than a few dark pixels. The resolution is that bad. To claim that these are shadows of the US flags left by the astronauts is really incredulous. These flags have been exposed to the moon's environment during alternate cycles of 14 days of scarring sunlight with 130 degrees Celsius heat and 14 days of freezing cold at minus 150 Celsius in the dark. Perhaps the most damaging would come from the intense ultraviolet UV radiation and the bombardment of micrometeorites on the nylon from which the Apollo flags were made. Even on Earth, a nylon flag flown in bright sunlight for considerably less than 40 years will quickly fade, become brittle, and totally disintegrate. This subject is treated very well by Jera White. Conclusions. We have seen conclusive evidence that clearly demonstrates that the Apollo missions to the moon were faked. So what is our evidence? We have clearly detected the telltale signature of the front screen projection technique in almost all of the Apollo photographs and videos. We have seen that the supposed Apollo moonscapes shown by NASA are not always what we would expect given the evidence in the satellite imagery. The mountains are always shown as rounded sand dunes and not the fragmented craggy landscape we would expect. Ted Aranda has shown us many inconsistencies in the Apollo landing sites which reveal the fakery. Colin Rourke has also shown us NASA fakery in the photographs. We have shown the error made by NASA in its presentation of the Apollo 11 orbital attitude of the CSM in 1969. Further evidence came from the photographs taken by Michael Collins of the Earthrise. In order to take these photographs, the command module must have been orbiting nose down and not nose up, as shown in the NASA orbit video. This orbital error was only corrected in 2018 as a NASA visualization. We examined the haphazard design of the lunar module and its contradictory attempts at shielding from the heat of the sun. Furthermore, NASA was unable to build a lunar module here on Earth that worked successfully. It is not a matter of the different gravitational forces on the Earth or the Moon. It is simply a matter of the dynamic control of a vehicle balanced on a single rocket. The technology of the time could not achieve the minute control required. In fact, it is hard to even contemplate that the Apollo lunar module is a sophisticated engineered spacecraft. We also see no evidence that the descent rocket was even fired. There is no sign in any of the Apollo missions that the rocket skirt was even slightly burned with the 2000 centigrade rocket exhaust. We have observed hot spots in the lighting of the moon's surface. The luminescence of the light from the sun should be fairly even on the moon's surface, but we see hot spots which suggests that infill lighting was used on the stage set. In the Apollo 11 restored video of the EVA, we can even see the stage lighting illuminating the background screen. We have examined the high-resolution images from the LRO with some disappointment. There is convincing evidence that these photographs have been doctored by NASA to falsely claim that the Apollo artifacts are still residing on the moon. We also looked at the question of the boot and the tire track trails so clearly shown on the LRO photographs and compared these with what we can see on the original videos of the blastoff from the moon. There is no question that the history of these remastered videos is clear evidence of NASA continuing the fakery. Finally, we looked at some of the evidence presented by NASA that some of the flags erected by the astronauts are still flying and casting shadows. Although it cannot be stated categorically that the flags would have disintegrated, it is highly probable that over 40 years of exposure to the moon, the flags would have perished and vanished. All of these elements is the evidence of irrefutable proof that the Apollo missions were entirely faked somewhere on planet Earth. The Sons of Apollo. The great cause of night is the lack of sun. William Shakespeare, As You Like It. NASA state that they took no other sources of artificial lighting with them to the moon, so the only source of light that the astronauts had on the moon was the direct light from the sun. The Apollo Sun. Hey Houston, we have a problem with the Apollo Sun. How would the sun look like from the moon? Well, we can assume basically the same as it does from Earth. The sun is the same distance to both the Earth and to the sun within a fraction of a percentage. So go outside if it is sunny, and if not, just wait until it is, or take my word for the following. You will observe something like the photograph above. The sun appears as a very bright source of light with an imprecise outline but with radiant spokes. After all, the sun is nothing more than an ongoing nuclear explosion. So what do we see in the Apollo photographs? The Apollo sun has a precise round outline with no radiant spokes but surrounded by concentric rings of light. This is not at all what we would expect to see. I can already hear from the NASA Pro fan club protesting that the sun, when viewed from the Earth, is through our atmosphere, and there is no atmosphere on the moon, so why should we expect it to look different? Is that correct? Well then, let's take a look at some photographs taken of the sun in space where there is no atmosphere. These two views of the sun look very much like we would see through our atmosphere, an imprecise outline and with very distinct radiant spokes. If we compare the two images, we can clearly see the difference. So why is the Apollo sun so much different from what we should expect? Of course, the simple answer is that the Apollo sun is not photographed from the moon. NASA X needed to simulate the sun on the moon stage set. You may suggest that they should have filmed outside on Earth, but the problem is that the sky from the Earth is blue, and on the moon it is needed to be black. The only other feasible solution was to use a very bright artificial light or parabolic reflector. This is why we see the concentric rings of light in the fake Apollo sun. This comparison analysis is from an excellent video by Pascal Xavier. The reflection of the Apollo sun. Take a spoon outside and view the sun as a reflection on the curved back of the spoon. Do you see how large the reflection is in the convexed back of the spoon? About a maximum of ½ an inch in diameter, depending on the actual curve of your spoon with radiant spokes. You can see it in any convexed shiny surface, for example, a motorcycle helmet. So we should know roughly what the sun should look like when reflected on the moon. You may be wondering why I ask you to do this. Well, as I said, the sun is about the same distance from the moon, so we should expect a similar size of the reflection in a convex surface of the moon to be about ½ an inch in diameter with the telltale radiant spokes. The convex surfaces we have on the moon are the face visors of the bubble helmets worn by the astronauts. I will let the skeptic Steve the Chemist explain all about convex surfaces in his video, but for now, in his second video, he shows that the reflection of the sun in the astronaut's visor is far too large to be the real sun. It varies tremendously if you view the videos and can be up to 3 to 4 inches in diameter, not the ½ inch or so that we would expect, and it has no radiant spokes. He deduces from this that it must be a studio light, possibly with a large parabolic reflector. He also draws our attention to the Apollo 15 video clip in which you can see the size of the reflected sun decreases with a decrease in the brightness of the scene. He concludes that it is impossible for the reflection of the real sun to change size and that the studio lighting must have been used, which is my opinion and his opinion firmly places the film squarely on Earth. If you think we have finished seeing Apollo suns, then think again. We have another skeptic masquerading under the pseudonym Jimbo, who brings us back to the sun's reflections in the Apollo astronauts' visors. Again, he makes the same point as Steve the chemist, that there is something very strange about the Apollo suns. They just don't look convincing. We do not see the small diameter reflection radiating rays that the skeptics say we should expect, but instead we see large circular disks of light. You may think now that you have had enough of the Apollo suns. Well, there is more. How about 2 suns? Skeptic Marcus Allen brought my attention to this video clip taken from the original NASA video of Apollo 14. The only original source for this clip was the movie For All Mankind. At time 241 on the video, the astronaut turns toward the camera and appears to have 2 equal-sized suns in his visor, clearly a different apparition to explain. Next, one more observation from Marcus Allen, not just one more sun, but another, albeit not the brightest in our galaxy of Apollo suns. In the NASA 1971 Apollo 14 video, as astronaut Ed Mitchell climbs down the ladder of the lunar module at time 6:43, he is clearly in total shadow, but we can observe a small bright light in his visor. Another revealing abnormality is the dark shade of the lunar module. You may ask what our pro-NASA groups say about these sun anomalies. Well, it seems that they are not too troubled by the 2 suns anomaly, as Lunar Tuner is happy to explain and demonstrate. He explains that the astronaut's helmet visor assembly consists of 3 layers of protection. The outer 2 layers of the visor can both create their own reflection of the sun, so easily explained we can have 2 suns. The reflection from the inner skin produces a much smaller and a diameter reflection of the sun, but this is not what we see in the video, in which both suns are equal in size and brightness. But we do have an alternative explanation from pro-NASA Occamite, who contends that the length is probably a reflection from various parts of the lunar module, most probably from the highly reflective mylar film which coats various parts of the lunar module. Although this is in no way explains the precise circular-shaped reflections. Our final attempt to get to grips with the Apollo sun concerns the lunar module. The lunar module was always positioned on landing with its exit door in the shade to avoid the astronauts exiting into the full sunlight and to keep that side of the lander cooler. Once landed, the lunar module was in a fixed position and could not move. However, as the mission progresses, the sun will slowly move its position in the sky. This next presentation from Hunchbacked examines the photographs of the lunar module at the start of the mission and at the end of the mission. One would naturally expect the shadow of the module to have changed. The evidence from the photographs indicates that the sun has not moved in the sky as it should have done, so we appear to have one more anomaly regarding our Apollo sun. Well, I think we've had enough of the Apollo suns for today. We have clear evidence of fakery in the Apollo suns in that the reflected suns do not look at all like real suns should be reflected. The instances of seeing 2 suns can only be explained by adding spotlights or reflectors. Wisely and slow, they stumble that run fast. William Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet. Gravity is perhaps one of the most discussed elements of the Apollo missions, and that this is probably to be expected, in that it is one of the elements of the Apollo evidence that can be accurately measured to determine where the filming was made, Earth or Moon. NASA ensured that there was ample opportunity to do this so as to cover the fakery. Gravity Primer. Just a quick primer on gravity before we go wandering off on the moon. I think quite a few of you may be confused about the whole gravity thing. I raised this matter as I had been asked many times about this from those who I had imagined were the most educated people. I will ignore Albert Einstein's concept of curved space for the moment and treat it as a simple force as Isaac Newton did. Gravity is simple, the force by which a planet or other body draws objects towards its center. The force of gravity keeps all of the planets in orbit around the sun, and it keeps the moon closely coupled with the Earth. It also keeps you firmly rooted on the floor. Isaac Newton showed that it is a function of the product of 2 masses' weight, and that the force diminishes by the squares of the distance between the 2 objects. So, the farther apart the 2 objects are, the less interactional force. We have gravity here on Earth, as you can observe when you drop something, or if you fall over. It is unusual as it keeps you and all things around you firmly stuck to the Earth. Likewise, we have gravity on the moon, albeit less than Earth's gravity due to the moon's smaller size. So you might just be wondering why the astronauts in spacecraft are floating around in zero gravity. Does gravity stop outside the Earth's atmosphere and then start again at the moon? So why do the astronauts appear to be weightless? Well, it might surprise you, but they are not at all weightless. What, I hear you say? You see it all the time on TV, weightless astronauts performing crazy tricks with weightless objects. Trust me, they are just as much as subject to Earth's gravity as you or I am. In fact, they are in constant free fall toward the Earth, pulled by the Earth's gravity. What you are witnessing is continually falling men, not weightlessness. This happens because of the speed and orbit trajectory of the spacecraft. It is continually falling towards Earth, but just missing it as it continually falls over the edge. There is a very good video by Walid Shahabi in which he explains what is happening to the astronauts and the spacecraft. The moon's gravity is only 1/6 of that of the Earth. The Earth has a diameter of 7,926 miles and weighs 5,972 sextillion tons, that is, 5,972 followed by 18 zeros. It may surprise you that it gets heavier every minute. At present rate, the Earth gains about 40,000 metric tons each year from the space debris that continually bombards our planet, but loses only a minuscule amount as some atmospheric gases escape our gravity. Some of this space debris are rocks from the moon, which it is estimated have taken about 10,000 years to make the journey as they circle the Earth, gradually being pulled closer and closer under Earth's gravity. The moon is considerably smaller, only about a quarter of that of the Earth, having a diameter of 2,159 miles and an approximate weight of about 81,100 with 15 zeros behind it tons. So the Earth could fit about 50 moons inside of it, and it would require about 81 moons to equal the weight of the Earth, as the Earth is denser than the moon. The great difference in size between the Earth and the moon is why the gravity on the moon is only about 1/6 of that on the Earth. NASA and faked gravity. In my research, I have found many videos from the pro-NASA devotees who appear to rejoice that, as they analyze Apollo videos, they discover that they can clearly prove to you that the gravity shown in the moon is that of the moon. It leaves me dumbfounded as to which aspect of fakery that they do not understand. Fakery means creating a falsehood that resembles as close as possible to the real thing. Did they really expect that if NASA faked the moon landings that they would have been so incompetent to have forgotten to adjust the Earth's gravity in the videos to that of the moon's gravity? In this vein, we have one typical contribution from NASA devotee Astrobrant 2, who delights in the fact that he can demonstrate that a thrown object falls at the speed as though it were in the moon's gravity. He goes on to assume that he can speed up the video by a factor to show how it would look in Earth's gravity. This idea of speeding up a video is totally erroneous, as we will discover later. Quite obviously, Astrobrant 2 does not understand how NASA faked the videos, as I will explain in Chapter 12. Clearly, NASA was well aware that the gravity in the Apollo videos could be used to calculate the gravitational forces to check whether they were really on the moon, and they made use of this fact to the extreme. It is surprising how many objects were supposedly thrown and dropped by the astronauts, and how many unnecessary jumps the astronauts made. All this to invite you to calculate the gravitational forces and so prove it was filmed in the moon's gravity. NASA even concocted several pendulum demonstrations. Again, the swinging pendulum can be used to check the gravity. All you need is the length of the pendulum and the time of the swing, and hey, presto, you can demonstrate gravity at that location. One such demonstration occurred on Apollo 14 as the astronaut Ed Mitchell was unpacking the second LSAT package. A strap fell down and started to swing like a pendulum, serendipity at its best. NASA even produced a paper on the pendulum to explain how it proves moon's gravity. You can find several more videos on YouTube rejoicing this irrefutable pendulum proof. For example, this one from Brian Pop Robson. Brian assumes that his calculations categorically place the astronauts on the moon. It appears that we have another case of somebody not fully understanding what fakery would involve. If you want to fake the moon landings, then surely it makes sense to fake the gravity, but somehow this seems to escape the thinking of the pro-NASA fan club, especially Brian Pop Robson. This pendulum analysis is given by NASA and several pro-NASA devotees as irrefutable proof that the astronauts were on the moon. It is only irrefutable proof if you can staunchly believe that Apollo went to the moon and cannot imagine how NASA could have faked it. Well, NASA did fake it, and I will explain how they did in Chapter 12.